Good morning, Mr. President, members of the court. I am Javier Caso, student of Business Administration, and I'm going to talk about my final project work. This paper is about unfair clauses in mortgage loans. To introduce a little bit the topic, I want to say why have I chosen such paper. The reasons are because that issue is of really high relevance to the society in which we live, and it's of much actuality. First of all, let's talk about the mortgage loan. The mortgage loan, according to the Civil Code and the Bank of Spain, it is a long-term operation by which the lender, usually a financial institution, gives an amount of money to the borrower, usually an average consumer. This money is destined in order to buy a house. In exchange of that, the borrower has to fulfill several payments over the period of the contract. But it is not an usual and typical loan agreement. It has a special guarantee. It has a special guarantee over the property. In case that the borrower doesn't fulfill any payment, the bank can initiate a foreclosure proceeding in order to recover the unpaid debt through the selling of the house. After that, let's talk a bit about the content of the contract. The content of the contract is composed by two things. The first one is the general contracting conditions. Those conditions form what is called the adhesion contract. It's called an adhesion contract because the consumer, the borrower in this case, has to fully accept it or fully reject it. After that, there are also individually negotiated clauses. For example, there is any contradiction between those predisposed in the general contracting conditions and those individually negotiated, there will be always imposed those individually negotiated. However, if those in the adhesion contract generate more benefits than the individually negotiated, they will be imposed over the rest. Apart from that, there are certain not individually negotiated terms that could be considered unfair. But what are unfair clauses? Unfair clauses are those that cause detriment to consumers, are those who create imbalance for both parties in the contract. What are the most common types? The most common types that we can find in almost every contract are three. The first one, early termination. What is it about? It consists of that if the borrower doesn't fulfill any payment, the bank, the financial institution, can initiate the foreclosure proceeding in order to recover the unpaid debt. After that, there is one clause called floor clause. What's it about? It is about that the bank establish a minimum interest rate that in case that the interest rate of reference, usually the Euribor, goes so low, it doesn't matter because the financial institution will maintain its financial revenues established in this minimum interest rate. After that, there is another clause, the default interest clause. It consists of a special interest rate that is applied in case that, as I have said before, the borrower doesn't pay any, for example, one installment, one quota. If he doesn't pay, it will be automatically applied such default interest that is much higher than the average one. Okay, after this brief introduction to the work, let's talk about a real case, the Mohamed Athid's case. It's very famous because in 2008, Mohamed Athid, that it was a worker in the construction sector of Barcelona, get unemployed. He get unemployed, but previously he had signed a contract, a mortgage loan contract with the financial institution, Caixa Catalunya, that he stopped paying because of his unemployment in 2008. After stopping paying some quotas, the bank decided to start the foreclosure proceeding in order to recover the remaining debt. Well, after that, Mohamed Aziz decided to consult the Commercial Court number 3 of Barcelona. The Commercial Court number 3 of Barcelona had so many doubts about the contract, and it decided to consult the Court of Justice of the European Union. What is the Court of Justice of the European Union? It is an European organism that ensures that every single European law is applied to every single member state. After reviewing the case, the Court of Justice saw that there was an inconsistency between the Spanish law and the European law. According to the European law, the judge in charge can act on his own in the foreclosure proceeding and stop it if he sees any irregularities in the contract. Otherwise, the Spanish law doesn't allow that. As the European law has to be imposed over the national laws, the Commercial Court number 3 of Barcelona, with his judge in charge, the Judge Seijo, decided to review and revise the case. After studying the case several times, he found 3 clauses that could be considered unfair. The first one was the early termination clause. It was considered unfair because the percentage of unpaid debt was so low in comparison to the total amount of the debt. After that, the second one was the default interest clause. It was considered unfair because the interest rate applied, the default interest rate, was much higher than 3 times the legal interest rate of the year 2007. And finally, it was considered unfair the unilateral liquidation clause. It was considered like that because that clause prevents the consumer to make a defense and opposition to the process, and it is against the European law. Well, that's all I wanted to say about my project, but now let's see what are the conclusions of such paper. The first one is that unfair terms or unfair clauses can be found in all adhesion contracts, and these unfair terms cause detriment to consumers. They cause an imbalance for both parties. The second conclusion is about the nullity. There are null due to unfairness 3 clauses. The early termination one, because the previously explanation, the default interest one, and the floor clause. And the final conclusion of this paper, and the most important one, is that there were an inconsistency between the Spanish and the European law. This inconsistency prevented the families to make an opposition to the foreclosure proceedings in their execution process. This is very important because families couldn't make a defense to retain its property, its house. So that's all my presentation. Thank you very much.